Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from around the world. So we're incredibly excited to welcome all of you to the Caribbean Resilience Finance Day and to engage in important discussions around financing resilience in the Caribbean region. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to our partners at Global Affairs Canada, IDB Lab, the High Level Climate Champions, and to all the participants that have helped make this event happen. Thank you very much. This conference has been organized as part of a collaboration between the Eco-Micro program from IDB Lab and the Scale for Resilience initiative, which is a partnership between Yapu Solutions, GAVA Capital, and the Alliance of Bioversity and CIET. Over the course of today's session, we'll explore key regulatory and investment dynamics in resilience finance, address common barriers, and more importantly, solutions to overcome them, dive into digitization of resilience finance, and hear about building the business case for resilience from leading experts across the globe and in the region. Now, before we start, just a couple of housekeeping topics before we dive in. Firstly, participants are muted in this conference, so if you would like to ask a question, please raise your virtual hand or post the question in the chat. Secondly, we love to see as many faces as possible, so if your bandwidth can handle it, feel free to leave your camera on during the sessions. However, a quick technical note on this, cameras and mics will automatically be muted once the recordings of the session begin, so you will have to turn on your cameras back again manually. Apologies for the inconvenience. And last but not least, we will be taking a screenshot now for recordings of the event. So please, if everyone could turn on their camera and smile, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, perfect. 3, 2, 1, smile. Thank you, appreciate it. So now, without further ado, we will begin the opening remarks. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Mrs. Marcia Toledo, Director for Adaptation and Resilience at the Climate Champions team. Marcia brings a wealth of knowledge in adaptation and resilience pathways, and she'll be kicking off today's event with a call to action. Marcia, over to you.
Thank you very much. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here at the Caribbean Resilience Finance Day. I'd like to begin by conveying the greetings from both the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions, Her Excellency Razana Mubarak from COP28 and Nigar Parderai from COP29. Their mission is to accelerate the Paris Agreement goals by linking the government action with non-state actors like cities, regions, businesses, financiers, and civil society groups, local communities, women groups, indigenous groups, etc. We are really advancing adaptation and resilience through two initiatives: Race to Resilience campaign that builds the resilience of 4 billion people, the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda, which is very much a global solution agenda to accelerate across different sectors, especially catalyzing adaptation finance. And one of our shining examples is our partner Scale for Resilience, which facilitates adaptation finance through blending mechanisms, providing digital and financial solutions to empower local communities. We're very proud of the work of the Scale for Resilience and their collaboration in the Caribbean with Eco-Micro, IDB Lab, the Global Affairs Canada, and other partners. It's critical, the opportunity to enable vulnerable groups like smallholder farmers to access vital nature-based solutions. And in that sense, we recognize the leadership in the Caribbean, especially that has shown extraordinary resilience, taking bold steps to combat climate change. You are already global advocates for climate justice. You are pioneering homegrown solutions like sustainable tourism, scaling renewable energy, restoring natural defenses like mangroves. Your leadership in pushing for financial reforms and innovating financial products is essential. And you are already unlocking much needed adaptation finance to protect your communities and economies. So today, I urge all of you to continue accelerating adaptation finance. This isn't just necessary, but is urgent. Without adequate investments in adaptation, we will continue to have devastating effects and the cost of inaction even higher. The next storm or drought will continue to strike, and our preparedness today will define our future. So for that, I call on all stakeholders to increase targeted funding for resilience, develop and implement finance mechanisms that enable this long-term view that allows the resilience to be developed, tailoring to these specific cases in the Caribbean, but as an example that is globally relevant. We must close this adaptation finance gap. And for that, critical as well is fostering the partnership between government, businesses, and local communities. You're already doing that, and we need much more from that. Everyone has a role to play, and blended finance models and instruments and tools that can help accelerate investments on adaptation are critical. And finally, continue to amplify the Caribbean's voice globally. Your examples, your leadership, the opportunities that you're bringing to finance resilience that are investing in people, in culture, in your economies is critical. And in that, all solutions that can be accelerated today will shape the future of millions in not only in the Caribbean, but also globally. So it's critical that we can seize that moment and commit to a future where the Caribbean not only survives, but thrives in the face of climate change. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Marcia, for that powerful message. Next, we have Mrs. Karina Coburn, IDB Country Representative for Barbados, who will provide remarks on behalf of IDB. Karina, our deepest thanks for being here today. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're hearing me well. So
Yep.
It really is a pleasure to be here. Actually, it's my second week as country rep in Barbados for the IDB. So I'm really eager to join the dialogue on this very important topic. First, I'd like to share that according to the Climate Policy Initiative in 2021 and 2022, climate finance flows exceeded US $1 trillion on average annually for the first time. However, in Latin America and the Caribbean, climate finance flows accounted for only 4% of total climate finance over the same period. Not only was the region's access limited to a minuscule percentage of global climate finance, but the amount of US 52 billion received is insignificant compared to the US 215 to 284 billion estimated to be required annually to finance a low carbon and resilient transition in the region. The EcoMicro program has been focusing on these issues since 2011, when it was initiated with support by the Nordic Development Fund. At the time, MSMEs, low-income households, and smallholder farms from this region had difficulty accessing clean energy, energy efficiency technologies, and adaptation products. EcoMicro aimed to address the primary cause of this lack of access by working with financial intermediaries to develop new financing instruments. The objective was to capitalize on opportunities in green financing while helping financial institutions, FIs, to adjust their risk management models to encompass climate change risk and also to incorporate climate impact assessments in their internal policies and operations. In 2016, Global Affairs Canada made a contribution to increase the outreach of the original program, specifically in the Caribbean region. And now, as of August 2024, the EcoMicro program has a geographically diverse portfolio of 31 projects across 20 countries. To date, EcoMicro has helped create 68 green finance products, of which 46 focus on adaptation and 22 on mitigation. So far, a total of 8,729 green loans have been placed in the market. Meanwhile, over US 17.7 million in green finance has been leveraged from FIs. In the Caribbean specifically, 18 green finance products were launched. 201 green loans were piloted in the market, with US 8 million in funds leveraged and 5,743 beneficiaries reached. While providing green financing is important, an enabling ecosystem is equally important. A key objective under the EcoMicro Caribbean program is to consolidate the green finance ecosystem and connect projects to public and private funders for scale. The EcoMicro Scale for Resilience initiative therefore seeks to foster collaboration among Caribbean FIs, allowing them to share experiences and best practices. It's expected that through collaboration and sharing of this nature, access to resilience and adaptation solutions will be enhanced, as will the conditions and mechanisms to finance them. At the heart of the Scale for Resilience program are three key features: sharing of insights and experiences while highlighting successes and achievements of partner FIs under the EcoMicro program; networking, which provides the opportunity for partner FIs to become part of the regional and international climate community with access to resources, events, and connections for the promotion of resilience and adaptation finance; and partnerships, which facilitate access to peer and investor networks, which can offer public and private funding for scale. Today's event brings together an ecosystem of investors, financial service providers, and facilitators to build community and share knowledge of how climate finance can support resilience of the most vulnerable in the Caribbean. IDB Lab is a proud partner in this event and in the broader initiative. I'd like to reaffirm the IDB's commitment to resilience and climate adaptation as prioritized in One Caribbean, our regional approach to promoting sustainable development in the Caribbean. Thank you very much to all our partners, especially Global Affairs Canada, which has been with us for many years, for the ongoing collaboration. I look forward to today's discussions.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Karina. Now I'd like to welcome Mr. Sébastien Sigouin, High Commissioner of Canada to Guyana, who will speak on behalf of Global Affairs Canada. Sebastian, we're honored to have you with us today. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Benedict, and thank you very much, Mrs. Cockburn, for your kind words. So yes, I'm Sébastien Sigouin. I actually have many hats. I'm the Canadian High Commissioner to Guyana, also Ambassador to Suriname, and representative to CARICOM. Mrs. Cockburn beats me to how new she is. I've been in this job for a bit more than a month. I think she said 2 weeks. So I feel like I'm an old hand compared to her, but new to the job, but certainly not new to the Caribbean region, and certainly very much aware how much climate adaptation and resilience is a critical issue for this region. I understand that today's event is the second time we do these events, so hopefully this is the beginning of a very long tradition. And Canada, Global Affairs Canada, is really happy to be part of it. Mention was made to it, but as you may know, Canada is the main financing partner to for the Caribbean component of the EcoMicro program, and we've provided over $7 million since 2016 to support a variety of projects that bring green products to the market, and we've also worked to leverage the financial contributions of various partners and loans from financial institutions. So 8 years after our engagement in the micro program, we know that additional capital is needed for the region to build the climate resilience. So that's really the challenge that we're faced with. How do we make linkages between the international financial institutions and the local banks and cooperative and credit unions so that they have access to funding dedicated to resilience initiatives? Last year, IDB approached us about a proposed partnership with Scale for Resilience which, as it was mentioned before, is really aimed at fostering collaboration between Caribbean stakeholders so that they share experience and best practices on resilience and adaptation solutions. So we are very, very excited to support this partnership since it was launched earlier this year, as it helps to connect resilience projects to public and private funding. Now, we know that the Caribbean states are particularly vulnerable to the impact of climate change, even though they're not contributing to greenhouse gases. If you listen to the UN General Assembly, the high-level segment a few weeks ago, many of the regional leaders raised that specific issue, the disproportionate impact of climate change on the region. So we know that we will need a lot more than public funds to meet the needs of the region in adaptation and resilience funding. Mention was made earlier in the first presentation on efforts to leverage the use of innovative financial instruments, such as blended financing, so that we de-risk the investment. But we also want to bring the private sector in this equation because they are also part of the solution. So that's why since last year, actually, Canada has announced 12 projects that total 12 projects for the Caribbean region that total an investment of over $140 million to support clean energy transition, to support climate smart agriculture and biodiversity protection, and climate and resilient and disaster preparedness and recovery. So a significant investment directly to support the region in those areas. But beyond the funding, we're also advocating for more financial assistance and capacity building for the region in every international fora that we can, whether it's at the UN or elsewhere. In looking at today's event, I noted that there's many distinguished panelists, some that preceded me, speakers, and a number of topics that are of particular relevance to address the challenges and opportunities to build resilience in the region. So let me just say that Canada is extremely pleased that the IRDB is partnering with Scale for Resilience to make today's event possible. We want this partnership to build on all the work that was done over the last 8 years and keep the momentum going. So in closing, Benedict, I just want to extend my sincere gratitude to our implementing partner, IDB, the individual firms that make up the Scale for Resilience initiative, and all those present here today for your time and attendance. I encourage you to make the best use of the experience and expertise that will be showcased today, and I wish you a very pleasant and productive day. Thank you very much, Benedict. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for those insightful remarks, and to Global Affairs Canada for the crucial support of the Eco-Micro Scale for Resilience initiative. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator, who will be moderating the opening panel of today, Mr. Anton Edmonds, General Manager of the Caribbean Country Department at IDB. Anton has over 25 years of experience working with regional governments, development organizations, and the private sector, and we're thrilled to have him guide us through this important discussion. Anton, the floor is yours. Anton, I think we cannot see you yet. Mr. Anton Edmonds. think we'll wait a couple more minutes. Maybe he still needs a little bit of time to join the meeting. Ah, there you are. I can see you now. I don't think that your microphone is working properly, Anton. Oh, here, I am allowing your microphone and unmuting you. Apologies. Yeah, there we go. It's working now. You can go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies. I rushed across from somewhere else, so it's on me. Apologies for all of this.
No problem.
It's good to be here today. Good to see you, Benedict. Good to hear from my colleague Karina and Sebastian, who we work together in a different lifespan. So it's great to see that he's in Guyana right now and look forward to engaging with him. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being here with us for this first panel. We're going to focus on international, regional, political, and regulatory frameworks that will shape investment flows and adaptation as it relates to resilience finance in the Caribbean. We have a great panel with us, looking forward to an engaged conversation and obviously hoping for questions from people who are in attendance. So look, the long and the short of it is that the Caribbean faces unique vulnerabilities as it relates to climate change. And without the right financial networks and frameworks in place, our ability to adapt and build resilience will be compromised. Today's discussions will explore how we can develop the political and regulatory environment needed to scale adaptation and in the financial services space or in the finances space across the region. I want to jump to our panelists because you're not here to really listen to me. You're here to listen to them and to their inputs. We have Ms. Andrea Rodriguez Osuna, who's an international environmental lawyer and climate finance expert with over 15 years of experience supporting Latin American countries in the efforts to access climate finance. Andrea is a climate finance advisor for Euroclima Plus program at GIZ, which aims to promote a green and just transition in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have Dr. Mohamed Nagdi, the executive director of the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. He's an expert in climate diplomacy, energy security, and has a deep understanding of the region's energy landscape. Dr. Nagdi is driving initiatives that foster renewable energy solutions and resilience building strategies across the Caribbean. We also have Ms. Henry Anderson, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Development Finance Corporation of Brazil, of Belize. I gave you a bigger country, but I know you'll bring scale to the equation. Who has decades of executive level experience in the public and private sectors and who has worked extensively on steering Belize's Development Finance Corporation towards sustainable practices, particularly in supporting the agricultural and MSME sectors through targeted financial solutions. And lastly, we have Mr. O'Reilly Lewis, who is the Director of Projects Department at the Caribbean Development Bank, who brings over 25 years of experience in infrastructure development and especially with expertise in climate vulnerability assessments and environmental policy development. So we have heavy hitters with us today. I want to basically pose my first question to Andrea. Andrea, given your background in governance and climate finance policy, can you speak a little bit about the current regulatory frameworks that we are facing in the region? And are they fit for purpose as it relates to the Caribbean?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. And thank you, first of all, for the invitation to this great event. I'm very happy to be here and share some lights of the work that GIZ under the Euroclima program is doing. But first of all, let me just very briefly explain a little bit about the program Euroclima, which is a regional cooperation program that fosters a strategic partnership between the European Union and Latin American and Caribbean. And this is based on shared values and commitment to address climate change and biodiversity laws. The program is promoting investment and financial opportunities in relevant sectors and the use of its different financial instruments, including those of its member states to address climate issues. The program is implemented by EU and UN agencies. GIZ is one of the implemented agencies, and we are a long-term partner operating in the region. I have to say that myself, I'm not an expert in the Caribbean region. I'm mostly in LAC, and unfortunately my colleagues from the region were not able to be here, but we're very happy to put you in contact with our colleagues on the ground for any follow-up questions. But now going into the question, a very important question, I have to say that at the international level, I think there has been a lot of progress made in terms of highlighting the importance of mobilizing climate finance dedicated to adaptation measures. And some examples that we can see at the UNFCCC level and the discussions, the ongoing discussions that we hear at the negotiations include, for example, the discussion around the new goal for adaptation, but also the specific goal for adaptation finance, and also the discussions that climate funds or the even goals that many climate funds have set up by setting caps to support adaptation measures, such as the GCF, for example. And of course, we can also highlight that the international commitment to establish and capitalize the recently created Loss and Damage Fund. And although this is, of course, a solution beyond adaptation measures, I think there are positive examples, practices at the international level that show the importance of adaptation. Having said that, we know that climate finance overall is not sufficient to meet existing climate demands in Latin America and the Caribbean. We just heard before at the beginning of the session about data provided by CPI on how much money has been mobilized to the region and how only 4% of the overall climate finance resources are being mobilized to Latin America and the Caribbean. And when we look at the Caribbean region, I think it's very important to look at the specific needs and circumstances of these countries, because often what we see is that there is a mismatch between what's offered financially and what can be delivered. Countries in the Caribbean are small in size, and a lot of times they put them in a disadvantaged situation because of the size of the project proposals that can be brought forward. So we believe that understanding some of these barriers that perhaps don't speak so much about policy frameworks, but are barriers that are currently hindering the effective access and implementation of climate finance for adaptation purposes is very, very important. And as I mentioned, it's not only related to what should be and what are the policy instruments in place, but rather about the specific conditions, these enabling environment conditions that are needed in the region to push for effective adaptation and solutions forward. So it's very crucial. This aspect of country ownership and having the capacities in place, the human resources in place, is crucial in terms of country ownership. And although we know that there's also examples to this rule, such as the case of countries like Antigua, Barbuda, there seems to be a common factor in the region. So in summary, I would have to say that understanding some of this was an example, but examples of the barriers that make access to finance possible is crucial for shaping best practices and for mobilizing climate finance towards adaptation needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Well stated, but and provides a great segue for Henry. The question really to you is the balance between this global climate standards and local needs and the adaptation that the region needs to face. So I pose that question to you following Andrea's statements in terms of alignment, and look forward to your inputs.
All right, thanks, Anton, and it's a pleasure being here. The question talks about balancing global climate standards with local needs and adaptation. And I posit that the Caribbean, we are takers. We are, I want to say, the victims of all of this. So we are not in a position to balance. We're in a position to try to adapt. We're in a position to try to align. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we can do to align, and from the perspective of Development Finance Institution. And if I have time, I'll circle back and talk a little bit more about what I just said here. But we have about 4 or 5 things I think we need to do, and some of them we're doing. We need to ensure that we have participatory decision making. So we have to involve the local communities to ensure that the solutions are culturally relevant and sustainable to them. Two, we have to look at context-specific solutions. When you look at the Caribbean, we have approximately 33 countries, but we all have different insights into, we need to understand the different local ecosystems and climate patterns. So it's not a best practice across the board. We need to have individual adaptation strategies for each country to meet their needs. So we have to have tailored strategies. The third thing we have to have is flexibility and adaptability. And this is a key one because climate change is dynamic. It changes a lot. And we're dealing with organizations or in the region and outside the region that provide financing that have policies that can't move. So from the perspective of a DFI, we try to explain what we're seeing and we're told, well, this is our best practice, this is a policy, and it might be a policy that's 20 years old. So we can't have that. That it creates a barrier. We also need to have agile monitoring and evaluation. Right? We need to be able to work iteratively and look at what our projects are doing and make a change on the fly. We can't wait 5 years and then look back. 5 years when you're dealing with climate change, some people will be dead. We have to also look at collaboration and partnerships. And this is at the multilateral level, at the government level, at the subnational level, with the private sector, as was mentioned here, with the NGO community. We all have to work together, share resources, and ensure that we create impact investments by de-risking and also collaborating to ensure that we get the funds where we need to in a timely way and the education. We also have to prioritize the vulnerable communities to ensure we focus on them and address the whole issue of access and equity in terms of adaptation financing. And we also have to look at sustainable development to integrate it in all that we do. I would suggest that in the Caribbean, we legislate that in the financial sector, every single financial institution must adopt an environmental and social safeguard policy and put it in place. And I'll come back to what I said earlier. When you look at it, we put out a study called Climate Risk for Latin America and the Caribbean, Are Banks Ready for Green Transition? And it shows many things. One of the things that is relevant here is that when you look at the relationship between physical risk before adaptation and you look at ability to adapt, it doesn't go together. So when you look at the Caribbean, we are highly vulnerable to physical risk, but we don't have the ability to adapt. When you look at the countries who create the problem, they are not as impacted by physical risk, and they have the high ability to adapt. And that perhaps explains why, while for mitigation, we have a Paris Agreement that outlines everything, but for adaptation, it has been lagging with how the funds are coming. So as the Caribbean, we have to advocate. We have to get out there and talk as our leaders have been doing, but we're not in a position to balance because the political economy in this world is not ready to address this issue, to look at entities like us. I know we have work that's happening, but this is an existential issue for us, and the support is not there. And when you look at what the amount of money goes towards funding wars in this world, then you understand that while things are trickling and it's improving, it's far behind where it needs to be. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that. The last element of this in terms of us looking at these the broader issues happening, but the climate issue, which is very specific to us, being oftentimes ignored. And very, very well stated. It's existential for us while we're looking at global conflict and everything else. Let me switch a little bit to Mohammed here in terms of current trends in the renewable energy space, especially in investments in the Caribbean, and how can that contribute to climate resilience?
Excellent question. So when we're talking about renewable energy investments in the Caribbean, we need to frame it within the context of two critical factors: the urgency, a need, and also the opportunity. So the urgency is simple in that our region faces some of the highest energy costs globally. And then this is also exacerbated substantially by the climate vulnerabilities that we're seeing to be increased more and more year in, year out. So because of that urgency, it also provides us with the opportunity in that the transition towards renewable energy sources presents a critical path forward where we can leverage our renewable energy resources responsibly for both energy security, but also to strengthen the climate resilience. So some of the key trends that we are seeing is, and many persons will be familiar with the uptake of solar. So particularly solar energy has seen the highest levels of adoption throughout the region, both by the utility, but also at distributive scales. Wind energy is also emerging in that there seems to be a very strong pipeline in the region for solar and wind. And also I want to speak a bit just quickly about and mention distributed energy, which also has a direct link to doing two things: reducing the giving us the ability to bounce back and become more resilient to the shocks that we're facing with extreme weather events, but also reducing some of the strain that the utility grids seem to be facing. A key component on the trends as well is energy storage. So a key complement to renewable energies is that battery storage, which has gained traction in the region, but we are suffering from economies of scale. Being small scale is being more and more difficult for us to actually be able to import and adopt the battery storage at the level that we do need. And also, which is very important, I think the public and private sector partnerships have really move forward significantly. So governments are collaborating more and more with private sector and the international development agencies and also MDBs to finance and build renewable energy projects at scale. So these partnerships are combining strengths of both the sectors, and they create a framework for sustainable and energy development that is resilient. So these trends enhance climate resilience, and they do so in three ways. By promoting energy security, as was mentioned, we also focus on resilient infrastructure, which needs to be looked at with a much more stronger lens, because although we're talking about having renewable energy systems, we also need to look at resilient energy systems to the shocks that we are facing. I think that there are two parts of the scale that we do need to focus on, and also it also lends heavily towards economic stability. So by reducing the energy costs and creating local jobs, renewable energy investments build economic resilience, and really it's a robust, diverse energy systems is less vulnerable to the climate shocks, which is very important, and also reduces the need for importation of fossil fuels, and that commitment for GDP, a significant amount of country GDP to have to import those fossil fuels. So in closing for this, it's just that the energy story is one of promise. It is a priority for all the governments in the Caribbean, in that they want to move away from the fossil fuels and transition towards leveraging our natural resources responsibly, as I mentioned, but also to shield us from the unpredictable nature of climate change.
Thank you, Mohammed. O'Reilly, let me swing across to you here in terms of the opportunities, really and truly following up on what Mohammed laid out here, the opportunities that exist for investors looking into entering the adaptation and resilience finance space in the Caribbean.
All right, thank you, Anton, and thanks to the organizers of this for inviting us to participate in this dialogue. So just to say how the bank sees this whole issue of climate adaptation, right? We see it as fundamental to everything that we do. So the incremental cost that's associated with ensuring that all of our investments are climate resilience, it's a must. It's a necessity, it's not an option. The level at which it's applied is a decision making locally in the country, but it must be applied. And so it is important to recognize that such incremental investments, which are often primarily about mitigating the risk of loss and damage, becomes a necessary part of the decision making in all investments in the region. So all investments must incorporate climate resilience as a necessary part of sustainable considerations. That is key. So for us as a bank, I think we see ourselves as trying to incentivize actions that will ensure that these things happen. And it's on two levels. One, trying to work with our partners, and partnership is absolutely critical, to identify and make available concessionary financing to de-risk the upfront costs with these initial investments. And we have examples of that. If we have time later, I could speak about our work with the GeoSmart initiative, which is a program we're working with the IDB on. We work through DFIs to make sure small businesses have access to concessional financing. We recently made an approval to DFC in Belize part of which is going to target renewable energy type investments. So that is really where we see the opportunities are, where we could work together as multilateral financing and developing agencies to make accessible concessional financing to cause this behavior change which is needed. So for us, the whole issue of siting investments, the standards taking into account rise in sea levels, rise in temperatures, shortage of water, all of these things are core to how we move forward. And we would want to cause actions that incentivize those things. And I agree with Mr. Anderson in terms of we have the opportunities to do country-specific and project-specific type assessments. So in each project, we should do climate vulnerability assessments, identify what the risks are in our local circumstance, properly articulate it, properly design for it, properly help to mitigate risk during construction and to operate the facility in a sustainable way. So I would say one, the opportunities relate to providing concessional financing in relation to the behavior that takes into account climate resilience in the design and operations of a project. And two, us helping countries to make that become part of the DNA in the planning, in this building standards, and so on and so forth. That would be our emphasis at the CDB.
Thank you, O'Reilly. So we're going to do a quick run through in terms of a second round of questions. So it's like a speed dating or speed question and answer session right now, so that we can allow for any participants to have any sort of questions of their own. So I'm going to start with you, Henry. Collaboration and alliances between government, policymakers and financial institutions is something that's very important. And I'm curious as to some examples that maybe you want to bring to the table of this sort of public-private, or not public-private, but this policymaker financial institution kind of engagement that has happened, that needs to happen for us to land the solutions that we want.
All right, thanks, Anton. I will touch on a couple of things that are happening in Belize and then a couple that I know of in the Caribbean. So the government of Belize has partnered with the 5 Cs to get GACF project for the sugarcane industry in Belize, and it's aimed at adaptation measures to put in drought-resistant varieties of cane to put in irrigation and drainage and things of that nature. So that's very big for us. We also have where government collaborates with the DFC. We're owned by the government. They provide sovereign guarantees, but they also have mapped what role DFC plays in the financial architecture for Belize and the projects we're doing. For example, Riley mentioned the facility from CDB. And I would like to big up the CDB here because that was discussed and negotiated and approved in 4 months. So that's really good. By getting the support from government and having a clear idea of what are the national determined contributions, what we need to do, what's expected of us, it allows for that kind of turnaround and collaboration. In the Caribbean, you have the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility, and that's the case with governments of the Caribbean, and the World Bank provides a parametric insurance coverage, and this has been working and assisting countries after natural disasters by rapidly, pushing for recovery and rebuilding efforts. And this is an area, when you look at Bahamas, for example, over the past 2 years, the damage they have suffered is like a year worth of GDP, and you can't borrow your way out of that. So while this fund assists, we still need something else that deals with the whole issue of what happens when you get damage. You have the Climate Investments Funds, the CIF, that looks at climate resilience infrastructure. So in Belize, we have done roads and bridges in areas where we couldn't pass when you have a flood. No, we're able to pass, and the economy keeps going, and less people are, dislocated and affected. The IDB has done a lot of work. We are partly here because of the work they have done. They have partnerships with the different, the CDB, with the different countries in the Caribbean, and the National Development Finance Institutions. And they've done a lot of work in disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation and sustainable tourism, and some of the additional stuff that was mentioned here. Obviously, we have the CDB, which is key. I believe about 80 to 90% of what the CDB does is directly with countries, but they also do the remainder with development finance institutions. The CDB has done a lot of work with DFC to allow us to develop to where we are today, and that's big. And as Urala mentioned, they build climate resilience in everything, and they have allowed the DFC to learn how to do this. We also have the Caribbean Resilience Fund that's up and coming, and that's going to have a Caribbean Sovereign Resilience Super Fund that's funded by the different countries and other entities. And I believe the CDB and the CDF, CARICOM Development Fund, will have and play a key leadership role in that. The CARICOM Development Fund as well are carrying out the mandate of CARICOM. So, for example, with renewable energy, they provided funds to the DFC to online. It's at a fixed rate, and it's very affordable, and it's driving the transition in Belize, and looking to finance distributive distribution or generation that's now happening in Belize because we have been able to update our regulations to allow for it. So those are some of the things that are happening right now.
Excellent. Mohammed, there are long conversations that have been had in the past as it relates to the regulatory environment and the political framework regarding renewable energy and energy efficiency in the region. We're going to lean on you here to really and truly highlight recent policy shifts or regulatory reforms that have had the positive impact that I think we all want to see in terms of renewable energy investments in the space. Positive, not those that inhibit, positive, those that use.
I'll do my best. So on that note, an instruction from the moderator, I'll say that the Caribbean is evolving rapidly. Let me place that into a positive context. So, but in all fairness, like many aspects for the energy transition, the pace and change varies across countries, and it lends to an opportunity for South-to-South cooperation, where countries who are not as advanced in terms of their evolution of the policy and regulatory requirements to be able to learn from member states and other colleagues as well. So I'm going to try to make sure this entire response is on a positive spin. But so what's encouraging is the matured recognition by all at the political level, by all of our member states and Caribbean countries, that renewable energy is essential not only for climate resilience, but also for economic stability. So I think that's very important. And many of the Caribbean countries have integrated ambitious mitigation and renewable energy targets into their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. And I found that there's a significant shift with those global commitments that, in my opinion, the Caribbean seems to be providing the greatest levels of ambition. So even though we are not in a position to be able to make a significant impact to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, we are leading the narrative as far as the ambition is concerned to ensure that our Caribbean countries are showing that there is a need for the shift, and we're moving in that direction in the hopes of someday being able to say that this is an example of best practice and that countries can actually transition successfully. So these commitments are translating into more national energy policies that aim to increase the share of renewable energy mix. And I'll give you example. I could give you examples of Jamaica and Barbados. There's also in St. Lucia, Dominica, with the strong movement towards geothermal exploration. Not a lot of time to be able to expand into a lot of detail, but many of our islands in the region are moving forward quite significantly. And I think that's important to know. I'm going to segue and talk about the integrated resource and resilient plans a bit, which is also important. So these are being developed to guide future energy investments, and they often include the renewable energy and energy efficient target. SECRE, the organization that I represent, has been supporting the development of IRPs over the past few years. We're continuing to support, and we have an additional few countries that will be supporting coming into 2025 and beyond. These are extremely valuable to be able to set a path and map a way forward towards ensuring that we can reduce the reliance on fossil fuels importation and look towards increasing the renewable energy share. And this is funding that comes from both the Caribbean Development Bank and also the IDB have both supported the funding for these IRPs to be implemented. So this is very important in terms of the partnership that we do have with the banks. Regulatory bodies and the utility relationship is also really an area that you can't really talk about a positive spin. Most of our utilities are either partially or fully privatized. They play an absolutely key role in shaping the energy landscape, but regulators must often balance the needs of consumers for affordable energy with the utilities, but while also I understand the importance of maintaining profitability, which kind of sometimes slows the adoption of renewable, but nonetheless, we have seen progress in many countries in terms of the improvement between the regulatory bodies and also the relationship with utilities particularly. The next part of my answer was a bit of doom and gloom, but I'm not too sure if you wanted me to go into that one particularly. But what I will just say to close, because I know time is tight, is that like we're on the right path, and I think that that's the most optimistic statement that I can make at this stage. Persons might be a bit more critical on where we are, but the most important thing is that progress is being seen at every single level, and whether progress is slow or fast, regardless as of the pace, progress is still progress. And I think that I'll leave it at that point so that I don't go into the doom and gloom of the discussion.
No, it's great. You're leaving on a positive note. You had a little caveat to it, but still, we'll hang on to the positive part of the equation here. Let me swing to you, O'Reilly, in terms of development banks and public-private partnerships, and really and truly on influencing and developing policy to attract private sector funding towards the adaptation space.
Thank you, Anton. We have spent a significant bit of energy trying to help the countries to build capacity and to set policies related to PPPs. And so we have helped, I think, Guyana, Trinidad, and a few other countries develop PPP strategies and policies, which are different stages of implementation. We have tried to build capacity within the public sector. So we've held several, again, in collaboration with the IDB, what we call boot camps, which is training sessions and training workshops, where we try to build the knowledge in the public sector about the complex nature of structuring these kind of deals and the whole issue of risk allocation, et cetera, et cetera. Again, that has had some impact, but as Mohammed was saying, different countries move at different paces. So we think that there's a lot more work to be done in that space, but that has been one of the roles that we have adapted with IDB and other partners to try and help the countries build their infrastructure and the capacity to structure these deals. That's one. But circling back to some of the things I discussed up front would be the issue of de-risking high-risk projects, initial investments in high-risk projects. And again, we have worked with the IDB, just to give an example for the collaboration involved in this initiative, which we call GeoSmart initiative, would be the IDBS, who would have gotten funds from the GCF, GEF, the government of Italy, UK Aid, the government of New Zealand, and the European Union, where we have concessional financing specifically for geothermal investments. And the financing mirrors the level of risk. So, for example, grant funding is available for early exploration of wells. And that is those are concessional, those are grants, but they are contingently dependent on the success. So if it turns into successful projects, then there's a requirement to repay those grants. But that initial risk that most in private sector investment people would not want to take upfront, it's covered by those projects. And at different stages, we have different types of financing. So some financing, so let's suppose it's in the plant development stage, then it would be low interest loan. And so we have had these investments in St. Kitts and Nevis, in Grenada, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and we are trying to get an operation in Dominica as we speak. And so those would be, and so what I'm trying to say here is collaboration. No one entity can do it on its own. And because the capacity in the countries are so limited, they themselves have difficulty sometimes accessing things like the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund. And so one of the key roles of MDBs is to be a catalyst and to provide access to those to the concessionary financing that's needed to help us adapt to this present danger that exists in terms of the climate threat to our small islands for the most part. So those will be the two, given the time, that I will focus on: the capacity building and the de-risking of high-risk investments. And all of those, in both those areas, cross-cutting is collaboration between MDBs and other financing partners. Thank you.
Well stated. So Andrea, I'm going to close out this round with you. And I noticed that you smiled a little bit when I asked Mohammed about the regulatory environment. It was a smile of bemusement or amusement. I'm not quite sure. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you, I'm going to ask you here in terms of, regulatory or policy shifts that could better enable financial institutions to scale climate smart solutions in the space.
Thank you very much for the question. And I'm smiling because I'm very excited to hear all these wonderful practices and examples. There's so much happening in the region. So it's really a great pleasure to be discussing with everyone and learning as well a lot of these initiatives that are going on. But going back again to the question, what I wanted to do is highlight some of the efforts that we believe are being done right now in a collective manner, because we're also talking about ways to scaling up climate smart solutions. So for example, the Euroclima program and GIZ are working with the OECS Commission, which gathers Eastern Caribbean countries with similar economic policy frameworks, climate change challenges and needs, among others, which allow for a common actions to be planned and implemented. And what we've seen from the experience working with the Commission is a growing interest in participating in regional and collective activities, policy-related and other types of activities, including those related to capacity building on accessing to and mobilization of climate finance, both for mitigation and for adaptation. So we see a very strong, I would say, positive interest in moving towards a joint approach to some of the solutions. But some other examples that we can also see is of some work that GIZ has done is supporting, for example, the development of project ideas through concept notes to the GCF in all 6 countries on critical infrastructures. And we also see that this positive commitment that I was mentioning is always part of the way how the countries are working. Other initiatives that are also been done in a joint manner was the development of the needs-based climate finance access and mobilization strategy, and a project led by the UNFCCC, which is very relevant to understand the specific needs, the potential ways forward for these countries in terms of adaptation and mitigation. And finally, another example is also the Caribbean NDC Finance Initiative supported by GIZ, which is a platform that helps consolidate resources, facilitates collaboration and peer learning, and offers opportunity to develop different innovative initiatives. And part of some of the activities that have been doing are capacity building related for the development of innovative financial instruments to scale up solutions. There are also some examples in terms of sectorial approaches to scaling up solutions, for example, through the Get Invest program, which is a technical and assistance program which focuses on accelerating investment in the Caribbean, in the Caribbean's energy transition, and through the provision of matchmaking opportunities through sessions for project developments to provide their ideas to potential investors. We've seen that there's more and more growing interest in financing some of these solutions. Some of these examples, of course, speak about energy, but we know that energy is a very important, plays a very important role in the discussion around resilience. So we don't know if this joint approach to solutions activities is feasible for all the countries in the Caribbean. Again, I think it's very important to look at where are those commonalities or those joint needs, opportunities exist or that are in place for having those joint strategies to happen. But of course, this could be a potential way to think when deciding on scaling up potential solutions on different matters related to climate change, and in this particular case, on adaptation. Thank you.
Excellent. So I know that we're running out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick sort of effort at recapturing some of the key takeaways that you've laid out, and I'm going to make an assurance to anybody who has questions that they can send their questions in, and that my colleagues here, my panelist colleagues here, will respond to your questions in due course. So some of the key takeaways that I've taken out of this is that in the MDB space, in as much as we all tend to maybe sometimes operate in silos, that there's a need for a pooling of capacity. I got this from you, O'Reilly, and I got this from you as well, Henry, that there's real need for all of us to work a little more closely together. There's a need for a joint approach to solutions. All of us, GIZ, IDB, all of us need to be sort of on the same page and engaged in the space together, not necessarily competing. Mohammed, there's a pace of change that is still a work in progress, but we are progressing, we are moving. So there's an upside as it relates to that in terms of renewables and policy change. Integrated plans are a good example of the advancements that we're seeing in the region. So it's a good takeaway for us in the development banking space to support that and provide resources. Regulators are in the space, and there has to be this balance that we need to make sure that we have between the utilities and those who are providing the services and the regulators, and providing the regulators, empowering them, providing them with the supports necessary so that they can do their job to balance things out. O'Reilly, it's not an option not to invest in climate resilience. And I think we're all clear on that. So this is not a nice to have, this is a must have that we need to take away from this. And there is an opportunity and there's evidence for that in terms of policymakers and institutions partnering. I think we also got some of that from you, Henry, that there's a good ecosystem that we have created, and we need to sort of feed into that as well. As it relates to renewables and resilient energy systems, that there are economic opportunities that are available there. So let's just not look at it once again as just a thing in the sky. I mean, there's some real resources, some money to be made in that space, and obviously there's an economic benefit in terms of cutting costs. But there's also employment that we can look at in the space that we may be overlooking. A promising future if we focus, and you know, the decision-making process has to be a participatory one. Henry, you laid in heavily on that at the end of the day, it's evolving as well, is that the decisions we're making today, we're going to have to probably change tomorrow. We do have to think to the future, but it has to be a participatory process throughout. We can't forget that there are stakeholders that have to be touched. There's local nuance that's needed, so it can't be a top-down approach, that we conceptualize these things in abstract and then we sort of throw it into the region and expect that it's going to be easily adaptable. And partnerships as well. I mean, you highlighted this, that partnerships are increasingly important. And I kind of want to close on that particular part, that the issue of partnership, the issue of public-private sector partnership, the issue of the MDBs and all of us being on the same page, being critical if we're going to advance change in this Caribbean space. So, Benedict, I'm going to sort of turn back to you. I think there's a virtual coffee break that's on stream right now, and I do want to thank the panelists for their participation, but most importantly, the thoughtful interactions and interventions that they provided us.
Perfect. Thank you, Anton. And thank you also for your participation as moderator of this opening panel. Yeah, I also found it super fascinating and interesting to hear about all the initiatives that are going on in the region. So for now, we're going to take about a 10-minute break so you can go get some coffee, go to the bathroom if you need to, and we're going to meet each other back here at 11:15 for the session on overcoming barriers along the financial value chain. So yeah, we'll meet you back here in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci.